Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, August the 5th, 2024. So, I missed Meghan's birthday. I mean, her birthday was yesterday, Meghan Markle. Her birthday was on Sunday, August the 4th, and she was 43. Well, in fact, in terms of when I'm recording this video, I'm actually recording it on Saturday morning, Pacific coast of the US, so it's still very much her birthday, so maybe I haven't missed it. A lot of you will be looking at this video on Sunday rather than Monday, so it's very important to wish Meghan a happy birthday, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to have a look at her horoscope and her solar return, her solar returns, because we like to look at her converse solar return and her direct solar return, and I suppose also to ask some questions about Meghan. You know, why, for example, has she become so unpopular amongst certain quarters? If she is a very divisive character. I mean, some people love her, some people can't stand her, and I think that's reflected in how people reflect on her in terms of the comments. If I'm negative about Meghan, I get criticised for that. Some people really do think that she's wonderful, and so I suppose I wanted to try to look at her horoscope in a constructive sense and ask myself, what would I say to her if she was consulting me? Is she getting anything wrong? And we've got to consider her year ahead, and I suppose I'm particularly going to focus on her solar returns. But before I look at Meghan, I want to consider what's happening today, which is Monday, August the 5th, 2024. So let's start by looking at the positions of the planets. And one thing you cannot see in this chart is the fact that Mercury is now retrograde. I mean, you can see that Mercury is retrograde in this chart because Mercury has an R next to it, and sort of yesterday Mercury did not have an R next to it. But what the chart doesn't tell us is the fact that today Mercury goes retrograde. London time, 5:56 a.m. Mercury came to a standstill from the Earth's perspective. And that is an important moment. And it can literally be a moment of standstill, and it just can be a time when things change. Whatever we're involved in, whatever we're feeling about the world, people's perceptions, it can just be something changes. And this is particularly the case as we've just had a new moon. So yesterday on Sunday there was a new moon at 12:13 Leo. And so, as I think I said in my previous video, if you've got a situation where you've got a lunation and Mercury changing direction, or coming stationary direct or stationary retrograde, and you have it within a very close period, say within 24 hours, it can cause chaos and it can cause a real change. Mercury moves from being direct to retrograde at the same time as the moon moves from being, say, waxing to waning, or in this case moving from waning to waxing. So everything changes, and I have noticed that this can often coincide with market turmoil or big changes in the markets. And on last Friday, we had big falls in many stocks, in many indices. I think was Amazon down something like 8% or something. So I don't know off the top of my head, but there were a lot of falls, and the question is, are these falls going to continue through today. I don't know. Obviously, I'm recording this on Sunday, so I don't know what the market's going to do on Monday. But maybe we'll get more falls on Monday. I don't know. I mean, the reason I say I don't know is because it's not my job to make financial forecasts. This channel is for entertainment purposes only. But it's certainly going to be very interesting to see what happens on Monday. Well, to see what happens today. So perhaps by the time you watch this video, it will be Monday, and you'll be able to look at the markets. Of course, they open on Sunday evening, really. So that is something to watch out for. Now, as far as what's actually going on aside from Mercury going retrograde, well, I should actually say another thing about Mercury retrograde is that when you're looking at Mercury retrograde, you should also consider what midpoints it's on. And before I talk about those midpoints, before I forget, I should just point out that if you do like this video, I would really appreciate that you indicate that you liked it, or if you're enjoying this video, or perhaps even if you think you might like this video because you've just started it. I would really appreciate if you were to indicate that you like it. And if you're enjoying this video and you're not subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you were to subscribe, because it doesn't cost you anything, and it does help the channel. Now, as far as Mercury's midpoints are concerned, what midpoints does it go stationary on? Well, it goes stationary when it's aspecting the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and when it's also aspecting the Pluto node midpoint. So Mercury is actually going stationary retrograde on some quite difficult midpoints. You put Mars-Uranus together, you with Pluto node, you could say perhaps a lot of people suffering through acts of violence. That would be one way of describing it, because Pluto node is about, according to Reinhold Ebertind, he talks about the tragic destiny of a large group of people. That's one approach. And then you've got the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and that is just about violence, things exploding. And when you put that together, you could say a lot of people suffering through violence, things exploding, or maybe it's civil unrest. As, for example, we're getting a lot of civil unrest in the UK. I probably need to look at that again in another video sooner rather than later. I mean, maybe that's connected with the fact that if you take the 1066 chart, you've got transiting Neptune on England's 1066 moon. And the moon might be the people, and the people may just be in a state of turmoil. And it may not be enough to just say, oh, well, it's just far-right extremists. Nothing to worry about there. We don't just a few troublemakers. It probably represents a more fundamental malaise than that. And so that's Mercury going stationary direct. As I said, you can't see that straight away just by looking at the chart, the fact that it is stationary. Sorry, it's not stationary direct, stationary retrograde. So that's Mercury. Oh, I suppose I should just give you some indication about how long Mercury goes retrograde for. So Mercury will go retrograde for about 3 weeks. And so with Mercury going retrograde for 3 weeks, I think it goes stationary on, I make it London time on Wednesday, August the 28th. So for the next 3 weeks, Mercury is retrograde. It may be a good idea to put certain plans on hold. Perhaps over the next 3 weeks, certain things won't work out as expected, and there may be delays. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, that could be connected with the summer, I suppose. People tend to slack off over the summer, and so maybe If you haven't done it already, maybe you need to wait until the end of August, or I suppose if you're in America, I get them mixed up. Is it Labor Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day? I think it's Labor Day. So I think Labor Day is around end of. It's around then, isn't it? Labor Day. So maybe it's time to just not put anything into action on, if you can possibly help it, until Labor Day. Well, that's a bit drastic. I don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies there. If something has to be done, then I suppose it has to be done. But just with Mercury retrograde, we do have to be careful, and we have to just make sure that we've covered all possibilities, and that we've always got a plan B. Now, that's not the only thing happening today. We have got Venus moving into Virgo. So you can see in this chart, August the 5th, 2024, noon set for New York, Venus has just gone into Virgo. Venus actually goes into Virgo at 3:23 a.m. London time on today, Monday. Actually went into Virgo last night if you're in the Americas. And if you're in Australasia, New Zealand, it will go into Virgo, I suppose, sometime this afternoon, probably late this afternoon. So Venus is in Virgo, and that is certainly a change. Venus was in Leo, working well in Leo, perhaps. Maybe it was working well in the sense that we wanted attention, perhaps we were getting attention, but now attention isn't so important. Venus in Virgo is about focusing on the details. And of course, when Venus goes into Virgo, its condition does deteriorate somewhat, because Venus is fallen in Virgo. Venus is exalted in Pisces, therefore it's fallen in the opposite sign. And I suppose that is about people being less concerned about the emotional side of things, and especially in terms of relationships. It's not about appearances, it's not about looking good, feeling good. That helps, but it's also about the details, and it can have a more transactional nature. Because I was talking about Venus in Virgo in my last video, and I mentioned it can be transactional. I was reading the comments. Some people take the view that, in their experience, it's not transactional, that that's not their experience. Others did seem to agree that there was a transactional side to Venus in Virgo. The thing is, there can be a transactional side to Venus in Virgo, because it tends to focus on external details. But with Venus in Virgo at its highest level, and I suppose that's what we should be focusing on, if we possibly can. Venus in Virgo is about relating to other people. Venus is about relating to other people in general. And I suppose Virgo is a service-orientated sign, or at least it can be. And so helping other people, putting ourselves at some level at other people's disposal without allowing ourselves to be manipulated, just doing something and not perhaps thinking just about ourselves and our material interests might be a good way of using the energy of Venus in Virgo. And this Venus in Virgo is making a conjunction to Mercury. This conjunction between Venus and Mercury is not exact, but Mercury is going retrograde now. So later in the week, Venus makes a conjunction with Mercury. And so, in fact, this Venus in Virgo could be quite creative, not necessarily because Venus in Virgo is creative in itself, but because it's conjunct Mercury. And so, it might be a time when we can use a fine sense of detail to create something that really might be quite incredible. So that is possible. And as far as the moon is concerned, for most of the day, the moon is moving through Leo. So you can see that at noon in New York, the moon is at 2720 Leo. So on the plus side, moon is conjunct Regulus. Venus is conjunct Regulus. So we've got a moon-Venus conjunction, kind of, on Regulus. And that might suggest that we can can get attention, and it might be a good time to demonstrating to the world how strong we are, how powerful we are, and it can be a good time for trying to get in touch with important people with Moon conjunct Venus in Regulus. So it's not bad that the Moon's position from a perspective of the Moon starting to move towards a conjunction of Venus and being conjunct Regulus. But the Moon is square Uranus, and that square to Uranus could be a little bit destabilizing. I think that is absolutely possible, especially towards the beginning of the day. And Moon in Leo can be, I suppose, can be quite stubborn. It wants things done in its own way, and it likes attention. Particularly Moon in Leo conjunct Regulus wants to be taken seriously. I think off the top of my head that Margaret Thatcher had Moon in Leo conjunct Regulus, and so with that Moon conjunct Leo in Regulus on Regulus, we want to be taken seriously. Many of us want to be taken seriously, wherever we are. But if this is the Americas. From at noon, Moon is in late Leo. It doesn't matter what your time zone is. This is an important influence today. But the Moon does move into Virgo late in the day, London time. Just 17 minutes past 10 in the evening. So that would be 17 minutes past 11 in the evening if you're in Paris or Berlin. So late in the day in Europe, Moon moves into Virgo. Late afternoon in the Americas, Moon moves into Virgo. So there will be a change. It may not be a bad change because Moon is making a conjunction to Venus, but the Moon will be moving out of a fire sign. The overwhelming power of the new Moon. Remember, we had a new Moon on Sunday. It will start to lose some of its immediate power because the Sun and the Moon will be in different signs. And actually that's often quite fortunate when the Sun and the Moon are in different signs. When the Moon is in the same sign as the Sun, the Moon can just be a little bit burnt out, and we can't be objective about it because the Sun and the Moon are just in the same place, and the Moon just can't express itself. So Moon moving into Virgo may actually be quite a good thing. So that is a change which is going to happen today or perhaps tomorrow if you're in Asia or Eastern Europe or Australia, New Zealand. And that is it for the main aspects. So there aren't actually a lot of main aspects. I mean, in fact, from an aspect point of view, the main aspect is basically Moon square Uranus, and that's the aspect that matters. Though we all do have to consider some sign changes, like Venus moving into Virgo, like, I suppose, Moon moving into Virgo right at the end of the day, and of course, Mercury going retrograde. Now, turning to the heliocentric picture, again, looking at things with the Sun at the centre of the solar system. Let's see what we have. Mars is separating from the square with Pluto. So over the weekend, Mars was exactly square Pluto. I mean, I was looking at the news up until I don't know, Sunday morning in the US. I mean, I noticed that what happened. There's more people being killed in Gaza. I think 18. There was some stabbings in Israel. So that has perhaps created a little bit of tension. But of course, can we attribute that to Mars square Pluto over the weekend? Well, there's always something going on in Gaza, isn't there? So I don't think we can necessarily say, oh, well, that's Mars square Pluto. But Mars square Pluto does does just add to this feeling of tension, that things are getting a bit difficult, and maybe by Monday some of that tension should perhaps be calming down as Mars moves away from that square to Pluto. Though we also have Venus trine Uranus today, Monday. So Venus is in Virgo, heliocentrically, remember, and it is trine Uranus in Taurus. So Venus trine Uranus could be interesting. It could be about changes in relationships. It's a trine. Relationships could become more exciting, and Venus is opposition Neptune. It's moving towards the opposition of Neptune. So with Venus opposition Neptune, certain things may be a little bit nebulous, not just in terms of relationships, but I mean, I suppose it can be about the relationships between countries, how countries relate, what kind of relationships do they really have? We don't really know, do we? I mean, we say that the United States and Russia, have terrible relations at the moment, but they're talking to each other all the time, secretively. Venus opposition Uranus, Venus opposition Neptune. They're doing, perhaps they're doing deals. They're negotiating. Russia was threatening to send arms to the Houthis, I believe. That was a theory in Yemen, but there was pressure behind the scenes apparently from the United States and Saudi Arabia. Did Russia get anything in return? I don't know. Who knows what's going on? But Venus opposition Neptune perhaps represents relationships and negotiations very much taking place behind the scenes. And with Venus trine Uranus, things can happen out of the blue in terms of relationships. But it's a trine, not a square, so I wouldn't have said that it will necessarily be especially dramatic. Okay, that is the heliocentric picture. And I now want to look at things from a perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, August the 5th, 2024. Let me just turn this round so that we have Aries actually on the left of the chart. Sorry about this. Let me just make it a more readable chart. There we go. Okay, so these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, August the 5th, 2024. Aries. Aries, you are in some respects a little bit serious, especially in terms of the way you're communicating. You're very focused on what you're saying and how you are putting your words together. And you may feel that words really matter. And there may actually be a little bit of self-consciousness here. And I know that all things being equal, Aries is not a particularly self-conscious sign. Aries likes to just act and perhaps worry about things later. And so you are trying to say things right. And I'm not just talking about the spoken word, I'm talking about the written word. And if you're writing emails or text messages or whatever, some chat system you're using, then I think you're going to be more careful than usual about what you write and how you put words together. And I think that is a good thing. You can be a little bit impulsive, and choosing the right words can make such a difference. And I think, Aries, you're going to be trying to imagine what impact your words are going to have, because you know that words are important, and you'll choose those words very carefully. And again, you should be choosing your words very carefully. And in terms of conversation, whether it's phone, face-to-face, I suppose it can be text messages as well, or chat messages as well. if you were to just not think about what you were saying or what impression you were giving, there's some danger that you could actually cause offense. Because right now, Aries, you can actually be very harsh, and your words can really be extremely cutting. And yeah, you'll have an impact, but is that the kind of impact that you really want? And also underlying this is that I think many Arians are just going to be more thoughtful than usual, and you may be having serious thoughts, and you may actually be having second thoughts. Second thoughts, I suppose you could connect that with the fact that Mercury is going retrograde. A lot of us are having second thoughts. Did we make the right decision, regardless of our sign? But I think you in particular are having second thoughts, and you're wondering whether perhaps you made a mistake. And in terms of trying to process information coming in, there may be just a certain negativity on your part. Perhaps interpreting things in a more negative light than usual. You know, Aries is a very positive sign, but it just seems when you look at the information coming in, you may be wondering whether it's really that good. Now, this shouldn't take away from you as a powerful and creative individual. You very much are. Remember, the sun is in Leo. In fact, there was a new moon on Sunday in Leo. And this new moon in Leo can represent a new creative beginning for you. And okay, to begin with, you might have your concerns. Are you good enough? Are you really ready for new beginnings? You know, yes, you're having doubts with Mercury going retrograde, but perhaps you just have to look at things again and review what you're good at, and just be very clear about who you are, what you want to achieve, and then perhaps also how you want to enjoy yourself. Enjoyment and pleasure are important to the average Aries, particularly now when the sun is moving through Leo, and the moon, also moving through Leo, is conjunct Regulus. It's moving towards a conjunct Regulus. Yeah, it's also making a square to Uranus, and there may be things that seem to threaten your creative self-expression. I suppose with that moon square Uranus, it might be something to do with money. You might think, well, it's all very well being creative. Does it pay the bills? Or maybe there's a time issue. You've got other things to do. But I think it's worth taking a stand in terms of really focusing on what you're good at, because you know there are things that you're really good at, and the new moon in Leo, which is still very, very active at the moment, very, very major influence, that new moon in Leo yesterday. It's making its influence felt, and I think in an Aries, for the average Aries, it's just really positive, and it is really time to start to think about all the things that you can do. And sure, there might be passing negativity, passing doubts. Actually, it's probably a good thing to have a few passing doubts, but don't let those doubts take over. You're on the right track. Don't worry about it. Taurus. Venus is moving into Virgo, and that's important. The planet Venus has a special connection with you. And so with Venus moving into Virgo, on one hand, you're becoming perhaps a little more sensible. You're understanding that there are certain details which basically can't be ignored. If you ignore these details, then you're not going to get much done. And at the same time, you may be looking at other people in a different way. You're not just looking at them in terms of just I suppose you might look at them with a sort of with a certain sense of naive optimism. Maybe in the past, you just say, well, they're a nice person, aren't they? They're okay. I'm not going to really think about it too much. But now you're thinking about some of the people around you, and you're starting to notice the details. You're starting to notice perhaps what they look like, what they say, what they don't say, and you may also be considering, are they any good for you? How perhaps can you benefit from them? Or indeed, how perhaps can you maybe lose out? How might they affect you in a negative way? And I think that it's fine to have these kind of questions, provided it doesn't get out of hand. And with Venus moving through Virgo, I think that you're starting to also have a sense of what you can and cannot do. It will become clear to you that there are some things you just really can't do, or perhaps just shouldn't be doing, because you're not particularly good at it. There's no point in doing something, perhaps, if you're not good at it and if someone else can do it better. On the other hand, there are some things that you're very good at, and I think that Venus in Virgo is going to allow you to tune into those things. Now, it's just important not to be too self-critical, not to just think that you're hopeless or to have self-doubt, but you've got to have the intuition to know what part of yourself and what part of your system of talents. We all have a system of talents, and it all sort of comes together. What part of this system you should be focusing on? What actually makes you special? And I think that with Venus in Virgo, this is something you can really tune into, especially as Venus is starting to make a conjunction to Mercury, and this Venus conjunct Mercury is exact later in the week, and I think that's going to be really quite good in terms of you really being able to get a handle in terms of on what you can do, and indeed what you can do well. I will be talking about that in a few days' time, so that is certainly good news. But Taurus, I don't think that you have to be in a frantic hurry today. Mercury has gone. Mercury is just got stationary retrograde. Some of you might be still recovering from yesterday's yesterday's new moon. I do this all the time in my videos, by the way. I mix up new moon and full moon. I mean, I know the difference between the two. It's like I misspeak. I mean to say a new moon, and I end up saying a full moon. It is a new moon. So we're still feeling that new moon, and I think that many Taurians may take the view that it's best not to make any external changes. It's not a time perhaps to be making big journeys, whether literally in terms of big journeys or big journeys in terms of the mind. It's best to focus on what you know and trust. And of course, if you focus on what you know and trust and you don't move around, that does mean people are going to know where you are. And because people know where you are, you may be in a position to get their attention and maybe even to get their praise. And that could be quite welcome. On the other hand, if you do find yourself moving around today, you're here, there and everywhere, then no one knows where you are, no one can really focus on you, and you're not really able to benefit as much from other people as you would do if you just were to stay in one place. Gemini. Mercury is stationary retrograde, and Mercury retrograde affects different people in different ways. I have a theory that Mercury retrograde maybe only affects people who focus on astrology. If you don't believe in astrology, or you won't be listening to this video, but if you don't believe in astrology, maybe Mercury retrograde doesn't work so well. Maybe it doesn't work at all. I don't know. Or certainly Mercury going stationary retrograde. Anyway, you're watching this video, and I think it's a fair bet that you believe in astrology. So we have to consider what it means for Mercury being retrograde. Well, Gemini, I think that you may be having a few second thoughts about certain things. And perhaps you thought you understood something. Perhaps it was all very clear what you were doing, where you were going. And now you're thinking about things again. And you're just not quite so sure. And, perhaps you're looking at the recent past and you're considering, have you made mistakes? And I think some Geminis might be thinking, oh, maybe you've made a fundamental mistake. And, the Gemini brain can just keep going, can't it? Just it can run and run and run. I mean, Geminis can actually ruminate about mistakes they made decades ago. I mean, I suppose that's a tendency. All of us can do that. But Geminis can sometimes be thinking, well, what if I'd done that? And if I hadn't done that? And, well, that would have been so much better. And so Mercury retrograde, there is this danger that you may want to go back onto old ground. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't say it, maybe it's not a danger, but it is a danger if you do it in a way that is somewhat obsessive. There's no point in going back on old ground if there's nothing you can achieve. So there's no point in considering a mistake you recently made, or even a mistake you made decades ago, and just thinking, well, what if that is useless speculation. And also you could argue that you are the sum total of your actions. And I suppose if you hadn't done something yesterday or 20 years ago, you wouldn't be this person you are now. And it's actually all about your identity right here. And I suppose Geminis need to perhaps think about that. And remember, I'm speaking as a Gemini. I hope I'm not projecting too much. So try to be comfortable and relaxed in who you are and the decisions you've made. But still, with Mercury retrograde, I think it's almost inevitable that quite soon you're going to have to go back over old ground. You may be, really wanting to move forward, you're ready to move forward, but now you realize that not everything has been sorted out, that there are things that are in a state of flux, and you maybe have to spend maybe over the next few weeks until the end of August. Then you may just have to work things through and think things through, and perhaps discover new stuff, and discover new stuff from the past. You thought you'd gone through it and you hadn't gone through it. It's something you've missed. So that is a distinct possibility. And on a positive note, as Mercury goes retrograde, it moves towards a conjunction of Venus. And that Mercury-Venus conjunction, I think, could be really useful. It could make you feel pretty good about yourself. And it could get you to understand something about yourself that you'd missed. You think a lot about yourself, but maybe there's something you just hadn't taken seriously, and you realize that you can do something in your own way, in your own space. You don't have to make a fuss about it. It can be something you do in private, but it can be something that is really very powerful. And I think that there is going to be a certain focus on your home. I mean, there is a focus on your home and where you live at the moment, because Mercury, your ruler, is moving through Virgo, and Virgo is a very home-orientated sign for Geminis. Now, Mercury is leaving Virgo pretty soon. It's going back into Leo, but Venus is now moving into Virgo. So what's happening is that very soon Mercury and Venus. We're in the process of it happening. Mercury and Venus are changing signs into going back. So Mercury is going back into Leo, and Venus is moving out of Leo into Virgo. So there's a lot of interplay there between Mercury and Venus. And as far as Venus is concerned, Venus is a planet that's connected with aesthetics, with what things look like. And with Venus moving into Virgo, you may look around you. You look at where you live. You may be looking at the wallpaper, as I'm looking at the wallpaper right now, and you may see things that you're not entirely satisfied with, and you may notice imperfections in your own home and in your living conditions, and as a result, you might want to make a few changes. Now, if you do notice things that need to be changed, that doesn't mean to say you should go and do them straight away. In fact, it may be the case you shouldn't do them while Mercury is retrograde. Indeed, you shouldn't do them until Mercury, firstly, goes stationary direct and then moves back into Virgo. So what happens is, right now, Mercury, your ruler, is just turned retrograde. It will move back into Leo. Then it will go stationary direct on August the 28th. And having gone stationary direct, it will start moving back into Virgo. So Moon, I believe, off the top of my head, September the 8th. Is that right? Yeah, Mercury finally goes into Virgo on the 9th of September, having gone back into Leo. So if you've got plans around your home, even if it's quite trivial pieces of redecoration, or I suppose it could be something larger, like wanting to change the place you live. I don't think it's going to be that drastic, but perhaps you should wait until around September the 8th, when the position of Mercury is completely clear. So there's a lot really to be said about Mercury and Venus. So there are things going on now. Also, Gemini, there may be something that needs to be said today. And the question is, how do you say it? You could so easily use the wrong words. I mean, that is absolutely possible. But it still has to be said, maybe. Because if you don't say it now, it may just be a question of speak now or forever hold your peace. It may be a last chance to say something. So if there's something you've been meaning to say, but you've been putting it on hold, then maybe now is the time to say it. Okay, Mercury is going stationary direct. It's perhaps already too late, but maybe there is something that really does have to be said. And finally, I have to point out that Mercury is square the Mars-Uranus midpoint at the moment. And Mercury will be square that Mars-Uranus midpoint because it's stationary direct for a few days. And so with that, I think you need a certain amount of caution at the moment. Perhaps just in a physical sense. Don't do anything stupid or dangerous. Be careful about doing things which even could be dangerous. I don't know, walking up the stairs, walking down the stairs, playing with electricity, playing with machinery. Machinery could be very aggravating, Mars-Uranus. And if you're playing with dangerous machinery, yeah, be extra careful, and just don't be in too much of a hurry. Okay, you could perhaps react to Mercury going stationary direct by feeling that you have to do something, you have to resolve this thing, you're being held back. But in your hurry to make things happen, then you could get yourself into a situation very suddenly that could perhaps be quite difficult. So, do take it easy with this Mercury square the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Cancer. Cancer, it's a time when you feel that there are important things that you should be concentrating on. And I think that many Cancerians are quite concerned about financial issues. I mean, not necessarily in a problem way, but you seem to just be aware that money does matter, and that you have to pay attention to it, and your overall relationship with money could be quite important. I suppose there might be a certain sense in which you feel that the way you spend money or the way you don't spend money has an impact, and other people spending too much money could upset you. I think you'll be very aware of how other people spend money, and that could be in terms of your family, or it could be in terms of your friends, or if you're working, you could look at how the company, any company or organization you work for, or your business, how money is being spent. And when you actually look at how money is being spent, you may be a little bit shocked and surprised. If you ask questions about money, and how much does this cost? How much is being spent? You may actually be pretty surprised, and this is simply this is not what you expected, and it may be something you can do nothing about. And I suppose it's a reminder that the first thing you need to do if you're concerned about money is to look at your own finances and to look at what you are spending and what your outgoings are, and what financial projections are. So that is something that you do need to consider. Now, Cancer, while all this is going on, it's just important possibly not to be too modest and unassuming. I think that it's a day when you can get quite a lot of attention, and I think that people are going to generally take the view that you are an important person, and you are someone who should be taken seriously. And in a way, I think you do have a certain natural sense of leadership. It's not a sense of leadership that you should really necessarily be boasting about. I think it should actually be quite clear. And I do think that people will take you seriously, and if there's something you want done and you want to demonstrate authority, then that is something very much that you can do. And at the same time, you're going to be quite precise in terms of how you relate to other people. I think you're going to want things done in a particular way, and I think that form is going to matter at the moment to you. Form in terms of how people introduce themselves, how people talk to one another. What are these formalities? Do people shake hands? Do people hug? Whatever people do, this is all going to matter to you, and it may even be a sense in which you can see that these social interactions particularly that's physical social interactions like hugging and shaking hands and whatever, kissing, whatever people do, is it's all going to be very important because it defines what a relationship is, whether it's a relationship with a stranger. And I suppose if you're using a language which uses what do they say, a formal you, not like English, like what do they call it? I don't know. Like in French, if you don't know someone, you don't call them first person. You don't call them the first person singular. You call them first person second. You call it what you use vous rather than tu. So it's very formal, isn't it? And which one you use is going to matter. Of course, as I said, in English, it doesn't make any difference. But if your first language is French or some of the, most of the European languages, and it does matter. So form in communication is going to be really important, and so Cancer, and you're going to be the one that's going to care about it. It's not so much going to be other people that care, but you're just going to be aware of how people interact with each other, and if there is inappropriate behavior or inappropriate use of words, being someone, for example, being inappropriately informal, and if they're using the wrong ways of interacting, you're going to notice. And I think that you'll also have a certain sense of the hierarchy. There is a hierarchical relationship to the way people interact with each other that you're going to be particularly aware of. And if someone breaks that relationship, behaves in a way that is perhaps too friendly, you will know. And I think you will take the view that that's given you important information about another person. So I don't think there's any need for you to get upset about it in an overt way, but you can just take note of it, and that will give you an idea about whether or not someone can be trusted and whether or not this person actually respects you. So that's a bit of a complicated way of looking at things, but that seems to be the broad issue with Cancer. So I think Cancer, it's kind of a bit of a complicated day, but I think a day that could actually be very useful and very informative about deciding which people can be trusted and which people should perhaps be treated with a certain amount of caution. Leo, you're probably still thinking about the new moon. Okay. You may not be thinking about the new moon, but you're probably feeling the new moon. There has been this new moon in your sign, and this new moon was yesterday on Sunday, and this new moon is or should be very much a new beginning for you. It's a new start, and I think that it's just starting to become clearer now. At the precise moment of the new moon yesterday, it was very difficult to be objective. It was the beginning. It was the beginning of a new lunar cycle, but that first beginning, when a new moon was exact, it may not have been very clear what was happening. But now that the moon is moving away from the sun, you're starting to get an increased level of objectivity. You can just get a feeling about what is happening, what you're supposed to be doing, and what you want to do. And so today, Monday, is the first day when you can start to think about what has changed. Because, to be honest, things really have changed. It's not just the fact that we've got a new moon yesterday, but we've got Mercury going stationary retrograde today. So a lot of things are happening. And I suppose, Leo, you have to ask yourself, what has changed and what are you now going to do about it? You haven't got all the time in the world. And at the same time, don't assume that your first set of plans is the best set of plans. Sometimes plans have to be changed, and with Mercury going stationary retrograde, I think there are aspects of current plans which do have to be reconsidered. And I think that the financial aspect of these plans needs special consideration, because it's perhaps now becoming clear that the financial situation has changed. I'm not saying it's changed in a dramatic way, but it's changed enough for you to perhaps reconsider certain things. Perhaps you just realize that something is too expensive, something is not practical. And before, you weren't really into that kind of practicality. Now you actually can see things for what they are, and it's becoming very clear what needs to be sorted out. And also today, there may be moments when Leos feel that they need to make a little bit of a fuss, and that is because the moon is making a square to Uranus. The moon, remember, moon is still in Leo for most of the day, perhaps even all of the day. And so with moon in Leo, moon in late Leo, moving to a square of Uranus, I think there's going to be a time today when you feel that you really do have to make an impression. Perhaps if you feel that if you don't make an impression now, then it's going to be too late. Or if you try later, you're going to be ignored. And so now may be the time to make sure that people hear you. And that's particularly the case if you're in a job, you're working in terms of business, but not just that. I think it doesn't matter what you're doing. You have to get people to hear you and to understand you. And yeah, you might get it wrong. You might be too hasty. You might be a little bit rude. You might use words that somehow feel a little bit inappropriate. But it's better that from just keeping quiet. Because if something needs to be said, it does need to be said. And I think that it's enough to be heard, and it's enough to be understood. And quite how you present yourself is just perhaps of secondary importance. So don't be too shy. Okay, try not to upset people, but sometimes it really can't be helped. But overall, Leo, I think it's a day when things are really starting to become clear, and I don't think there are too many questions that you have to be asking yourself, and you're going to know the answer. And so, I'm not saying you're going to have 100% certainty, but things are becoming increasingly clear, and I think that this clarity is going to allow you to take the right kind of actions. Virgo. It's always a bit of a tricky time for Virgos when Mercury goes retrograde. Mercury, stationary retrograde today, and it's a situation where you've got Mercury is, of course, right in your sign, and so Mercury goes retrograde, then soon enough it goes, because it starts going backwards, and then it moves out of your sign back into Leo, and it will stay in Leo until September the 8th. But still, right now, Mercury is still in Virgo, It's still quite strongly placed in Virgo, because Mercury works very well in Virgo. And it's a time when I think that you're going to have moments of indecision. You're not going to be entirely sure what you want to do. And, if you have been moving in a particular direction, then all of a sudden you might have second thoughts. Is this really the right thing to do? Maybe you plunged into something and you weren't aware of all the facts, and now you are aware of the facts, and you're realizing that some changes need to be made. And that is absolutely reasonable. It is a time when it is okay to change your mind. It's okay perhaps even to break your promises. I understand that Virgos don't like to break their promises, but if the situation has changed, even if the situation hasn't changed, even if your perceptions have changed, that is enough reason to make it okay to break a promise. Okay, you shouldn't take the breaking of promises lightly, but sometimes it just has to be done. Or if you don't want to break a promise, you can perhaps put something on hold. So if you're ready, if you thought you were ready to make a decision, then now you can say, well, hold on, let's wait at least until the end of the month when Mercury goes stationary direct. I think that's on August the 28th. So that might be something that you actually want to do. Now, today is not just about Mercury going retrograde, it's also about Venus moving into your sign. And I would have said Venus moving into Virgo is good news. Okay, Venus might be fallen in Virgo, but Venus is the lesser benefic. Jupiter is, of course, the greater benefic. And so with Venus moving into Virgo, with Venus moving into a conjunction with Mercury, I think that this is going to give your social skills, I think, a real boost. I think that you'll be able to relate to people very well. Okay, maybe not on an emotional level. And perhaps that's a good thing. There are many ways to relate to each other, to relate to people. And yeah, the emotional side of things is not really emphasized at the moment. It's more about relating to people on a sort of a physical level, and also having a sense of how you and other people can benefit each other. I mean, the reality is, of course, people wax lyrical about love and romance and selfless love and all that kind of stuff, unconditional love. But the reality is that all of us are thinking about benefit. That's a major impulse for any relationship. How can I benefit from this relationship? And benefit can take many forms. Benefit can be, does this relationship amuse me? Does it interest me? Does it make me feel like a whole person? Does it undermine me? Does it take up too much time? So these are the kind of questions that perhaps you're going to be asking yourself. And I don't think that you should feel guilty about asking these questions at all. I think these are absolutely appropriate questions. And, it's probably hardwired into our evolution as well to think about the costs and benefits of relationships. And, okay, you don't have to be open and honest and tell everyone that you're thinking about the costs and benefits of every relationship you're in. It can be a private process, and that's absolutely fine. And you can work things through. And I think that may actually allow you to fine-tune some of the many relationships you're in. And perhaps you'll decide that certain relationships are not really doing you much good at the moment, and are just not being very productive, and you might just want to quietly distance yourself from certain people. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And what you're doing here is you're using Venus in Virgo in the best possible way. Though, with Venus in Virgo, there can be a service side to Venus in Virgo, helping someone perhaps without thinking about how you are going to benefit. Although one can be cynical about this. Is there really such a thing as a selfless action? It's like with Mother Teresa, isn't it? And people go on about Mother Teresa. Well, you can watch Christopher Hitchens' video about her. But what did he call it? Hell's Angel. The idea that you can. But you can perhaps get to heaven by on the backs of all these people you're looking after, and on the backs of the Calcutta poor. Okay, and I understand it's not called Calcutta anymore, but so that there is that is a deeply cynical way of looking at things. But so in terms of the service aspect of Venus in Virgo, and Virgo as the Sun in Virgo, Mother Teresa, she was a Virgo, I'm pretty sure. And, benefiting spiritually from helping people, or at least feeling good about something. Again, taking this rather cynical view that there's no such thing as a selfless action. So, yes, if you see an opportunity to help people, to be of service, then the satisfaction is nonetheless could be very real, and you just may feel that you're doing something really positive that is going to be spiritually enhancing. I know I'm sorry to sound a bit cynical on that, but I think with Venus in Virgo, cynicism and looking at things for what they really are is part of what it's all about with Venus moving into Virgo. So that just might be something that you do want to consider, Virgo. But in general, Virgo, I think that today is going to be productive, and I think it is just really is a good thing to reconsider your plans, and at the same time to be just aware of all the things you can do, and just also looking at the basic nature of some of the relationships that you're involved in, and perhaps considering questions of costs and benefits. Libra, you may feel that you want to separate yourself out from the rest of the world to some extent. You're looking at what's happening around you, and you're not entirely comfortable with everything that's going on. And I know if you're a Libra that socializing is important, that you're very aware of the social dynamics around you, but right now you just wonder whether it's really the right thing to be doing, to be getting heavily involved with other people. Is it absolutely necessary? And maybe you also feel that perhaps certain people don't fully respect you, or they're taking up too much of your time, and that now might be a good time to really think about yourself and your own interests, and do things because you want to do them, not because someone else wants to do them. And I think that if anyone has been taking you for granted recently, it's now going to be very clear to you. You'll know who's taking you for granted, and you'll get a very good understanding of people's motivations, what they want, and that might mean that you have a chance to just reconsider everyone you know and how you relate to them. That doesn't mean to say we're talking about the end of relationships. It just may be that certain relationships just need to be renegotiated, and they need to be renegotiated in such a way that you have a little more control, and also that you're given the requisite level of respect. And yeah, in general, Libra, I just think that at the moment you're really going to want to hold something back. You just don't feel that you have to be honest about everything, that it's not necessary, and that if you're too honest, it might undermine you in some way. Though, try not to ask too many questions. I mean, you don't want to get into this whole thing too deeply. I mean, there is a danger that you sort of overanalyze it and perhaps get too concerned with psychological issues, trying to work out, depth psychology, trying to work out, what someone else's demons are, and how are they reflecting their demons. And maybe there's, you might have a sort of a ranking system. Some people are more evil, some people are more evil than others, that kind of thing, sort of a dark thought. So you could fall into that trap. I think it is a trap because it's in a sense is an exaggeration. If you associate people with demonic forces, with evil, it's possibly not going to be helpful. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is because I just noticed that Black Moon Lilith is very close to true Black Moon Lilith is very close to the South Node, and the South Node. So you've got true Black Moon Lilith is on the South Node. It's in Libra, and perhaps Black Moon Lilith represents some of those demons, some of the darkness that sort of underlies other people. I suppose you might also be considering your own relationship to things that are dark and sinister, and you may be considering that, and that might bother you a bit, but I wouldn't worry about it. I think that you don't want to overanalyze it. You don't want to get obsessed about it. You need to really keep things on a material and factual level. And I think that is something you can do, because Venus, remember, Venus is your ruler, and Venus is now moving into Virgo. So with Venus moving into Virgo, that is likely to have an impact on you. With Venus moving into Virgo, and it stays in Virgo until, I think Venus stays in Virgo until 29th of August. Then it moves into Libra. I mean, 29th of August, that's great, because Venus moves into Libra, it moves into your sign. But until August the 29th, it's just important to be quite down to earth, not to get sidetracked by mere show, by people wanting attention. That's not going to interest you. And I think that you're just going to fundamentally see people for how they are, and you're going to be looking at things perhaps at a surface level, because Venus is in Virgo and Venus is on a material level, but the surface level doesn't necessarily mean that it's superficial or is incomplete. The surface can tell you a great deal of things. If you take the Sherlock Holmes approach, I mean, isn't that what Sherlock Holmes is doing all the time? Looking at little surface details, and from those little surface details, understanding the whole picture. So that's perhaps a way you should consider trying to operate while Venus is moving through Virgo. Being perhaps hyper-focused on the details of your various social interactions and not being sidetracked by emotional concerns or psychological concerns, just looking at how things actually are on the surface. And sometimes it is what you get, or what do they say? What you see is what you get. Maybe that's it. So you really, Libra, you don't have to make things too complicated. Scorpio, you are in a position, Scorpio, where I think you have quite a lot of control and quite a lot of power. You can make your impression felt in no uncertain terms. And Scorpio, I think that today, first day of the week, it's a time when I think people will notice you, and they will just take the view that you are someone who really does need to be respected. And if you're not respected, then I think that you will make your feelings very clear, and your sense of just importance is going to matter. I think you're going to seem to be an important and powerful person today, provided you make some effort, of course. If you spend your day hiding under a rock, of course, it's unlikely that much is going to happen. But if you go out there and you make a special effort to make an impression, then I don't think you'll be disappointed by the results. Now, that does not mean, though, that everything is going to be smooth. The moon is making a square to Uranus, and with that square to Uranus, you might find that there are just things happening that are somewhat distracting. You might feel, for example, that people are not behaving as they should be behaving, and things may happen that you hadn't really planned for. And the question then is, how do you respond to the situation? And you have to get the balance right. You can't ignore it. If you're being disrespected, or if something is happening that you hadn't planned for, then you've got to respond. But you've got to respond in an appropriate way. And of course, with Moon square Uranus, there's some danger that you overreact. And that is not something that Scorpios want to do, or indeed need to do. Because if you overreact, of course, you lose your power. You need to keep a sense of integrity, of emotional integrity. You are the adult in the room. If you lose your temper, or if you use overly negative language, then that might undermine you. And talking about language, there is some danger that the words you use today may be somewhat inappropriate. you might just say something that is offensive, but very clever. You'll be very good with words, but you're able to say something perhaps out of frustration that just, okay, it might cut someone down to size, and maybe that's what you intend, and maybe that's fine. But if you're too cutting, then you might cause more damage than expected. So it's going to be important, Scorpio, that you use your words very carefully, and particularly if you're in a confrontational situation, and you perhaps, if possible, consider why you're saying what you're saying. Are you doing it because you're trying to be constructive? You're trying to change something. Perhaps you're trying to change someone's mind. Or are you using words out of frustration? I mean, that is certainly possible. That you feel a frustration, things aren't happening, and you lash out. And Scorpio, if you start lashing out, then all of your efforts elsewhere might be threatened. They might be undermined, and so that is something that you do need to be aware of. Finishing up with relationships, then I think that you might notice that some people around you are undergoing a bit of a change, that they are perhaps becoming more down to earth. You may have felt that recently some people, even people who were quite close to you, may have been prima donnas, had been wanting praise and attention, and perhaps you found it slightly irritating, but things are changing now. And, with Venus moving into Virgo, people are, perhaps even the important people in your life, are just becoming more down to earth and more practical. And I would have said it's just better able, you're better able to deal with them, and I think they're finding it easier to deal with you. And as people are becoming more practical, I think that might be a time when you can, change the nature of certain relationships, but in quite a subtle way. I think that there's just going to be, more honesty around, and probably it's going to be easier to just tell people just how you feel, particularly if you and the other person really trust each other. You can just keep it on a simple level. Try to focus on the things that matter. It's not a time for getting overly emotional, but I think in general the important relationships in your life can become simpler, and that's because I think both you and the other person are just becoming sort of more realistic and more down to earth. Sagittarius. In some respects, Sagittarius, you have a high opinion of yourself. That's fine. And you want to have a high opinion of yourself. I think that you are just aware that you are special, and at the same time you want to be able to see yourself in the best possible light, and that's going to have an influence on your actions and on the way you present yourself. And the way you present yourself could be really important, more important than usual. And so you might find yourself thinking about how you look sort of more intensely than usual. I mean, I don't think that's something that the average Sagittarius spends an excessive amount of time on, but over the course of August, Sagittarius, with Venus moving into Virgo, you may find yourself thinking about appearances just more than usual, and what you wear, what you don't wear, is going to matter to you, and you may be sort of looking in the mirror more than usual, and I suppose there could be a bit of self-consciousness there, perhaps worrying how people are evaluating you. And, it may just be a little bit superficial. You might think, oh, yeah, you shouldn't really worry about being evaluated on the way you look and what you're wearing. But as far as you're concerned at the moment, that may be how evaluations work. So I wouldn't worry about focusing energy on the way you look, because I think that your judgment is going to be very good, and you're going to be making choices that are quite appropriate, and at the same time you're going to be able to communicate a broad message in terms of how you present yourself. How you present yourself is saying who you are and what kind of message you want to give to the outside world. And that is a message about, I suppose, what makes you special, what makes you talented, what you're good at. It's all reflected in how you appear. And that's just the way it is. I don't think that it's necessarily superficial. I mean, it's superficial in the sense that it's a surface appearance, but it's still very much part of who you are. So that is very much something going on. But Sagittarius, you're not a superficial person, and at the moment you do have a sense that things do go beyond yourself. And we've just had this new moon, remember? So we had this new moon on Sunday, and I think that this new moon did reflect on your broad sense of your horizons, where you're going to, what your wider goals are, what your place in the cosmos is. And we've still got this new moon, but it's not exact anymore. The moon is moving away from the sun, and this phase just after the new moon, when you're starting to get a sense of what this new moon is all about, you're starting to see that there are new opportunities emerging, and they're not trivial opportunities. They're opportunities that relate to who you are and what makes you important. And I would have said it's just important to have an open mind and just consider the possibility that the experiences you have, maybe today, certainly over the next couple of weeks in general, could change your perspective. Your perspective right now is a little bit fluid. It is becoming changeable, and what you believed last week maybe not entirely what you're going to believe next week. So that's a way in which things are changing at, I would have said, quite a fundamental level. Now, some Sagittarians may be looking at the world in a rather negative light. Now, Sagittarius in general is a fairly optimistic sign, but at the moment you can see things that don't look good and that may bother you. And you're starting to be aware of a deterioration. Not in your life, probably not in a life of people that are important to you, but just a general deterioration. And you can see what's happening in the economy, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, and perhaps even what's happening in your community, and you can see it. And it's going to be quite clear that it's happening, and it's part of perhaps a long-term process. But your actual response may actually be interesting. It's not that you're going to be depressed about it. You may, I suppose you might in some cases feel a certain sense of, what's the word, Schadenfreude, delight in someone else's misfortunes. Okay, that's not very nice, but that might be a possibility. Or you may be in a situation, Sagittarius, where you can actually benefit from someone else's problem, or society's problem, or an economic problem. It just requires a little bit of flexibility, and you can see that this actually may be an opportunity. So what seems a problem, what seems a very serious problem, may be a real opportunity for you to benefit. I don't know, it could be that you could financially benefit, or you could benefit from the fact that other people are depressed about something, are concerned about something, are panicking, but you're keeping your cool. So it's not a situation where you need to feel guilty about it. It's not like you're making the situation bad. It's not you causing the situation. You're the person that can perhaps solve it. Or it may just be something just very simple. Things go wrong. You're just there to benefit from it. And that's just the way it is. And it's not a bad, it's not a good thing, or it's not a bad thing. It just could be a developing situation that sooner or later can work to your benefit. Capricorn. Venus is moving into Virgo. So we've now got two planets in Virgo, Venus and Mercury. And this, from a Capricorn perspective, I think is a good thing. Virgo is a sign in which it's a sign which you have a certain sympathy for. And with Venus moving into Virgo, I think this allows you to look at the world in a different way. And you no longer do you have to be negative, thinking that this is the whole thing is a difficult situation, that maybe you should stay out of it. Now you're starting to see that you can now see that it's all making sense, and at the same time you are part of the future. Yeah, you can be part of the future. The future is not something that's just happening to you. It's easy to say that, isn't it? To think that we can never put the clock back. We are just passively watching as just time whizzes by, and we're becoming increasingly obsolescent. That is a temptation, a tendency to think that. But I think, Capricorn, you can start to put yourself in the center of things and perhaps consider the possibility that you can be the future. You can be part of the future, and that you have a role to play, and maybe even the fact that you can make the future. But in order to do that, you of course have got to be far-sighted, open-minded. You can't be constrained by tradition. I mean, tradition of course matters, especially if you're a Capricorn, but you can't see tradition as something that just is like a straitjacket. You have to look beyond it and just consider, all the things that really are possible. And if you're working over today, then I think that your approach is going to be methodical, but at the same time, you are going to be open to new possibilities. And perhaps because you're being methodical, you're aware that there are ways of doing things more quickly, and you're going to be open to new ideas about perhaps being more productive, or if you sort of run your own business, it may occur to you that there may actually be something new you can do, something perhaps relating to the future or a developing trend that you can start to integrate into your business, perhaps, and you'll just have a good idea about how to work it out. It may be something, maybe it's to do with technology, and you have to take the time to work out how this technology works. But I think that is something that you'll very much be able to do. But it's important to be patient. I think that what's perhaps happening, not just now, but over the next few weeks, is it's a kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You consider the new, but then at the same time, once you start considering the new, this is complicated, and you're thinking, can this possibly be done? And then you have to do some thinking about it, and you have to go back and ask yourself some serious questions. Then you can put things, then you answer these questions, and then you can go back and start moving forward a bit. Then you have to reconsider again. So it's perhaps a slightly complicated process, but the future is complicated. And so the way you manage your transition from the present to the future is not 100% easy, but you're someone who can manage it, you can handle it, and I think that you will have a growing sense of confidence as you start getting results. And so that does look good. Though another point about society in general, maybe not just be, it may go more from society. It's just that what we have at the moment is that the South Node is quite close to a conjunction of Black Moon Lilith. And it's just that when you try to go too far out into the world, that South Node on the Black Moon Lilith may just encourage you to see things that you perhaps don't want to see. You could perhaps obsess about what could go wrong. And I suppose this goes back to what I was saying about the future. You need to approach the future in an open-minded and confident way. What you don't want to do is look at the future and get totally sidetracked by the darkness of the future. And that might represent South Node on the Black Moon Lilith, and the future in particular relating to, if you're working, it might be to do with the future of your work, the future of your business, or it just may be about the future of you and society in general. Now that South Node Black Moon Lilith may also have a relationship to your mother. And when I talk about mothers in these 12 sign forecasts, I understand that people have all sorts of relationships with their mother, and in many cases their mothers are no longer alive. But as I say, the mother is always alive at some level, in terms of memories, in terms of influence, in terms of how the mother has been integrated into one's personality, especially if you take a sort of Freudian perspective. And I suppose, some people become their mothers, some people aspire to meet their mothers. It kind of all depends, doesn't it? But with Black Moon Lilith conjunct the South Node in a part of your chart connected with the mother, there just may be thoughts about the mother, particularly if the mother is no longer around. And I suppose you may start to see your mother as a whole person. There may be something going on which you can get some information about your mother and who your mother is, and it's maybe just a thought process and getting in touch with memories. And it's not something which should be too intense, because South Node conjunct Black Moon Lilith can be a little bit obsessive, I think. Seeing something apparently dark or difficult and just getting obsessed about it. And instead one should just say, well, that's just the way it is. And so it might be a good idea to just have a sort of a natural sort of understanding of one's mother's influence. Of course, if your mother's still alive, then that might be different. It may be something about your own mother's thoughts and feelings and experiences, and maybe it's a good time to talk to your mother, maybe about sort of quite serious things relating to the past, because the South Node conjunct Black Moon Lilith, South Node is the past, and Black Moon Lilith, I suppose it represents a side to the mother. So I know that's probably inappropriately complex, and these are just forecasts of the 12 signs for today, and I'm probably exaggerating it, but that just might be something that Capricorns want to consider. Aquarius, you are right now in a position where you seem to be quite sociable. I think you can be quite sociable, Aquarius, and I think that you have a good understanding of other people, and you understand what motivates other people, and I think you also understand other people's fears. I think you have a good understanding of other people's fears, and if people are apart and are separated from one another, I think you'll have a good understanding of why this is happening. And certainly if there's any disharmony around you, people arguing, having differences of opinion, not talking to each other, again, you will just have a good understanding of why it's all happening. And this might mean that you're in a position to maybe do something about it. I think that it's a time, Aquarius, when I think that you actually can bring people together, and you can just emphasize what people have in common, and you can do it in quite a serious way. It's not about being emotional and just everything's fine and happy and let's have fun, that kind of thing. No, you can do it in a very serious and methodical way. You can start to bring people together, and I think they're going to appreciate it. And as far as your own relationships are concerned, I think this is a time when, if you want, you can find new things that you have in common with other people, and perhaps new ways of relating. I don't think I'm really talking about emotional relating, but just things that you have in common, shared activities. I mean, all of this can be done, and it's happening against the backdrop of you understanding the importance of certain relationships, and also perhaps understanding their dynamics. And the emotional side of things, okay, can't be entirely ignored, but if you get sidetracked by the emotions within a relationship, that might not actually be healthy. I know we're all supposed to think about emotional intelligence and how great emotions are, but emotions are just one side of things, and it's perhaps by focusing on the non-emotional side of any relationship that you can actually start to bring a relationship together, and that's just like doing it in quite a practical way. If you start saying to yourself, well, me and this person, well, we don't have a rapport, that's just the way it is, there's no emotional connection. Well, what does that mean? It's completely vague. You can actually focus on particular connections, particular things that people share that may, in themselves, may not be emotion, may not have anything to do with emotion and oneness and even togetherness. But you can, if you create enough togetherness, then emotion can almost become an emergent property. So that comes later. But so, don't worry too much about emotional complications. And, as an Aquarius, if you're a typical Aquarius, then, when you stray onto emotional ground, very often you are weakening yourself, and, you need to focus on your strengths. And we also remember that yesterday there was a new moon in Leo, in your opposite sign, and I think I hope I didn't forget to say, that new moon in Leo, in your opposite sign, if you're an Aquarius, that can represent a new beginning in terms of relationships and a new way of relating to people. And at the time it might not have been clear, but now that the moon is moving away from the sun a bit and it's moving into very late Leo, I think that you can start to understand what this process is about and what actions you can take to strengthen relationships. And it is a new beginning, and I think that if you think about certain relationships in your life, there has been a change. It's an ongoing change, and it's now perhaps a time where you can actually understand what's going on. And the moon is still in Leo, though, and that's just a reminder that people do appreciate a bit of praise, a bit of attention. And I know that that's not something that Aquarians are particularly into. Aquarians like to be logical about things. What is the point of attention? What is the point of flattery? What's the point of praising people? But just being nice to someone and appreciating someone, with the moon in late Leo, actually with the moon close to Regulus, the royal star, treating someone a bit like royalty or mini royalty, without, of course, going over the top. They would really appreciate it. As they say, if you can give someone the red carpet treatment, if they're important to you and you want to cultivate them, then it's not going to be as difficult as it sounds. It might feel a bit fake, but it's all about appearances, and I think that is something you can do if you feel that it is appropriate. Pisces. Venus is moving into Virgo, and so we've now got Venus and Mercury in Virgo. So with Venus and Mercury in Virgo, we're starting to get the Virgo emphasis. We've had this changing emphasis over the last, I don't know, since the spring, or I suppose all the time really. But planets move from one sign to another, and now things are starting to move into Virgo. And of course, Virgo is a sign which in the Pisces horoscope does have a connection with other people, and there is activity going on here with Venus and Mercury here. And as a Pisces, you would maybe prefer it if things were a little indistinct. You really don't want secure. It's not secure. You don't want firm boundaries. This person has this particular role, and this person has that particular role, and you don't want to get too obsessed about annoying material details. You just want to see, you want the broad picture. That's Pisces. Pisces is the ocean, after all. But you're perhaps being challenged a little by people who are asking questions, who want things to be defined. And defining things is something that you don't entirely want to do, even though Saturn is moving through Pisces at the moment. It has been since the beginning of 2023. You're perhaps being challenged to define things. And it's something you're perhaps not entirely comfortable with. And there may actually be times when you just feel a little bit of criticism or implied criticism. And when you're with people, you may feel that they're sort of digging at you and trying to probe you, trying to get a response out of you. And also, they're trying to define something. And yeah, that's not something you want to do. But I think you've got to give something. Something needs to be given. You have to give someone some information. You have to make some effort to explain yourself in some way, because that's the only way to, create a certain sense of certainty, so that people know who you are, they know where you're going, they know they know something about who you are and what you want. So do try to provide some clarity. And I understand it's not something you necessarily want to do, but it would just make things, I think, a lot easier. And also, you might actually benefit from getting more clarity in terms of the people around you, because if things are confused and are up in the air, then that creates a possibility of the imagination getting out of control. People imagining things, or you imagining things that aren't necessarily true. And so that is not going to be helpful. And so if everything is explained, or at least as much as possible is being explained, then I think that is certainly something to be welcomed. Now, finally, you may find that a couple of people or one person is just being a bit abrupt. They seem to be in a hurry, and you're wondering whether this is the right thing for them to be doing. And it may be that someone is actually in their hurry, in their desperation to make things happen. They could cause a lot of trouble. And Pisces, I think you just need to be aware of it. I think you need to identify the problem and watch someone, this person champing at the bit and showing their irritation. And once you've identified this person and you've identified the problem area, then maybe you can do something to calm them down. And because if people are worried about things and are going in difficult and dangerous directions, I think you'll be very good at not just identifying the issue, but addressing the issue. So in certain situations, Pisceans can be, they can almost, I won't say a firefighter, because there is a sense in which you have to there could be a few social fires that may need to be put out. So that is one way of looking at it. But it just could be someone who someone who sees trouble as it's starting, particularly trouble relating to another person, and you see the trouble starting, you see it about to break out, and you can stop it happening before it gets out of hand. And I'm not saying that's going to happen today, but I just think that that is a possibility, and you could actually save people, or at least save one particular person, a lot of trouble if you act in a timely way. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to look at today, Monday, August the 5th, from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 59, dispersion. So this hexagram is about the floods. It's about a storm. It's about everything being swept away. And you might see it in terms of power washing. Just this dramatic force, very watery force, just sweeping things away. And on the surface, it sounds rather difficult. I suppose you might think of a fleet of ships, and there's a storm, and the ships get scattered, and it's all a bit overwhelming. And it's true that perhaps our first experiences today are it's going to feel like things are going to be swept away, that we might be losing things, and we might just get caught up in the chaos, I suppose, like being thrown into a washing machine. And there is a moving line here, and it's the third line from the bottom. Now, the third line from the bottom is often an unfortunate line, and this line indicates that we are involved in something that is, I think, really difficult. It's really, really difficult, and we may feel emotionally invested in what we're doing. We don't want to stop doing it because we've already put so much energy into it, and because of this emotional investment, we don't want to give the impression of giving up. It may be because we don't want to lose face in terms of if other people know we've got this issue that we're battling against, or it may be about ourselves losing face. And, just a reminder, this I Ching hexagram, it just relates to today. It's not a big deal. It probably isn't a big deal. And it may relate to something totally trivial. It may just be some minor thing we're trying to sort out, and maybe a technical problem, and we're bashing our heads against it. Or it could be something more substantial. But it depends. You have to ask when you look at this video, what's relevant to you. Of course, it may not be relevant to you at all. So what do you do in this kind of situation? Well, you have to let go. If your ego is engaged with it, you have to let go of it. You have to sort of ask yourself, look at it afresh, and not think about it in terms of losing face. And there may actually in the end be a certain sense of renunciation, just allowing the whole thing to be swept away. So it's like, in terms of the storm and the rains, just sweeping everything away. Just let it go. It doesn't matter. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we should do anything stupid. We might be engaged in something that's important. We can't just let it go. You have to consider the situation. And perhaps you also have to consider what maybe went wrong. And perhaps part of the problem might have been that we weren't following the rules. There should have been a sort of a framework in which we were working, and we didn't have that framework. And because we weren't following the rules, then we were making ourselves very vulnerable. Because if we were following the rules, then our ego wouldn't really be engaged, would it? We'd just be following the rules. It's just very simple. Those rules might be social rules, accepted behavior. If it's an object, it could be just an instruction manual. Not reading the instruction manual. It kind of does depend on the situation. But for whatever reason, not following the rules, it just all gets swept away. But the I Ching tells us that this actually isn't a disaster. It's not a catastrophe. We haven't lost anything. Sure, we might be to blame to some extent, but it's not the loss it appears to be. And this third line moves, and so that moves us to a second hexagram, and that second hexagram is hexagram 57, which is the gentle. And one way of looking at it is that sort of the storm having passed, the gentle may allow us to actually really understand what the underlying problem was. Because the gentle is the wind, and the wind goes through things, and it gets to the bottom of things, and it gets to the heart of darkness, and we can understand that. And that is then once we understand, then we're able to start to look at the whole situation again. So we were perhaps doing things the wrong way. It was never going to work. It just got swept away in the floods, and now we start again. But this time, we understand what the problem was. We understand what the heart of the darkness actually was. So that is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, if you take the Greg Winkup translation of the I Ching, he actually doesn't call this hexagram 57. He doesn't call it the gentle. He actually calls it. He actually calls it kneeling in submission. Now that doesn't sound very nice, does it? But remember, this is all about losing our egos, and it's about just accepting that we haven't got all the answers. And we started in the beginning. We were trying to focus on something from a perspective of ego, that we could sort it out on our own. That we didn't necessarily have to be bound by the rules and conventions, but that didn't work. And so, even if it's not kneeling in submission, there's a certain humility coming in after the storm, and maybe that's just simply getting other people's help. Also accepting the fact, perhaps, that we're not quite as independent as we thought we were, but we have to perhaps cooperate. And there are perhaps other people, other organizations or something that can help us achieve what we were trying to achieve. And, it's all about losing one's ego. And I think that's ego. I suppose ego is something where it's considered to be important to have an ego, but sometimes we can be so focused on our ego that there's a contradiction here. We're so focused on our ego that we don't actually achieve what our ego wants us to achieve. And so, in a way, by letting go, we are actually putting ourselves in a position where we can actually achieve. And in the process, in the end, that should be good for our ego, shouldn't it? Okay, that's the I Ching, and now I'm going to look at the horoscope of Meghan Markle. And I am going to try to be balanced here. It's her birthday, so that's the important point. It's her birthday, and I do understand that Meghan Markle is not what she used to be in terms of, I suppose, social media, YouTube videos. A year ago, she was. I think she was a much more mega person in terms of people being really interested in her, and I'm kind of grateful to Meghan Markle because, when I was first starting this channel, when did I start the channel? Last year, and I did notice that when I put up videos about Meghan Markle, people would watch the videos because they found Meghan Markle interesting. I don't think they find her so interesting now, but so people would watch the videos because I could, put a photo of Meghan Markle on, and people would watch the videos, and it helped me get a few subscribers, and it helped me get some views, and so, I think that Meghan Markle is in some ways, quite a selfless figure. She's done so much for sort of, I suppose, small micro creators like me, and of course much larger channels as well. But she's done so much for people trying to make sense of YouTube, and she's allowed people to, through her, make videos, and in some small way she's helped build my channel. So I do feel very grateful to Meghan Markle. I think she's done something really great here. Very selfless, and she's kind of martyred herself to help people like me. So I really shouldn't be too negative about her. So turning to Meghan Markle's chart, and I just wanted to have another look at her chart. I mean, I've looked at her chart a lot. You'll notice I got a new photograph. Not a new photograph, but I always used to use a photograph of her. It was kissing Harry after she married, and I would take half a photograph, and so now I've got a different. Now I put a slightly different photograph, and so turning to Meghan Markle. So we have, let's see, where has she gone? Okay, there is she. There. Okay, so there is Meghan's chart, and I think there is a certain enigma with Meghan, in the sense that she's got a lot of planets in positive signs. She has got Sun in, by positive, I'm saying the fire signs and the air signs are positive. She's a fire-air person. And she's got the Sun and Mercury in Leo. She's got Moon in Libra, Saturn in Libra, Jupiter in Libra. A lot of positivity there. And she's only, but the two planets she's got in negative signs, in fire, in water, and earth, are Venus and Mars. And so I think she is a positive person. And at the same time, if you look at the balance of her chart, if you take the MCIC line, all her personal planets are towards the ascendant. They're on the sort of east side of the chart. And so this gives us the impression of someone who is positive, active, creative, someone who is able to make a name for herself on her own terms. And yeah, I would have thought someone who could perhaps be quite original. And that seems to really show in her chart. Yet, very often a lot of her activities, I mean, particularly since she married Harry, they do seem to be a little bit derivative. She seems to be trying to be someone else. Trying to be whatever, an A-list celebrity, and she had some she had some plan to have a cooking channel, and people were saying, how the hell could she possibly compete with Martha Stewart, and what does she know about cooking or gardening? So there is something derivative about it. She seems to be following someone else's playbook. This is an idea that this is what you're supposed to do. And I'm just wondering, how does that fit in with her chart, and what is actually going wrong here? Because I think that, to my mind, is something that's wrong. And I'm wondering, maybe it's the South Node. The South Node is the problem. Maybe that South Node in Aquarius in the 7th house, she's perhaps putting, it's her line of least resistance. And that line of least resistance, she's putting too much emphasis on relationships, for example, believing that, you goes to England, finds a relationship with an English, and I think that was her plan. She thought about having a relationship with a footballer, then she found Harry. And so perhaps there may be just that South Node in Aquarius, just maybe an excessive concern with relationships, and perhaps doing what is supposed to be the right thing. And I think that could be an issue for her. So if I was advising her, I would think that she needs to get into this North Node in Leo, but in the right way. I mean, North Node in Leo, you could say, oh, well, she's Leo, she's really into herself. Sure, that's Leo, isn't it? But it's not. Leo, at its purest form, it's not about narcissism. It's not about just getting praise for the sake of it. It's about doing something that is genuinely original. And I think that she's got an issue here. And maybe she was finding it easier before she married Harry. I think she had some website that was doing quite well, selling products or something, or talking about products. Was it called the TIG or something? But with Harry, as soon as something happened, I think, and there is something rather derivative about her, and I'm just wondering what that actually is. And so that is one aspect of her chart that I've been thinking about. And we think that it is a female chart, and so we think, oh, she's a Leo, but is she really a Leo? A female chart, in a female chart, you could say that it's the moon that is more important than the sun. Certainly after early 20s, I think that women tend to be more like their moon and less like their sun. In men, it's the opposite. You start with your moon and you turn into your sun, and that's how it works, I think. I mean, I don't want to put that as a sort of a hard and fast rule. But so perhaps we should consider Meghan not as Sun in Leo, but perhaps we should start to focus on her moon. I mean, there's her moon, moon conjunct Saturn and Jupiter. So maybe she's just fundamentally a moon conjunct Saturn person. Very much focused in control, and it's a brilliant Saturn. I mean, her Saturn is great. I mean, Saturn is exalted, and she's got the moon conjunct Saturn. So, yes, it's very focused and it's very determined, but it's also rather controlling, isn't it? She perhaps doesn't give much away. Yeah, it might be conjunct, your moon might be conjunct Jupiter, but maybe that's all part of it. And perhaps her problem is that maybe she's over-controlling with that moon conjunct Saturn. And that's perhaps how the positivity has been misdirected. It may not be about the North Node. It's just all about being controlling and, of course, believing there is something that she should be. And that might be moon conjunct Saturn. So moon conjunct Saturn would perhaps, it could say something about her childhood and the expectations she's felt as a child. I suppose growing up, I suppose. I think she grew up in, for times she was she in California, Hollywood? I mean, she was built, I suppose she's always been aware of that Hollywood environment. And Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, that 1980s, that was exact on August the 4th, 1981. So that Moon-Saturn conjunction is perhaps an issue, something that she has to deal with. And that Moon conjunct Saturn may be a certain sense of a lack of flow. And I was reading an article about her, was it her podcast, Archetypes? And I think the general consensus is that her attempts to set up this podcast and interview famous women was generally not very successful. And I was reading this article, and the suggestion was that she was too obsessed about her own image. I mean, part of the problem is, of course, that she was interviewing these very famous women, and she was tending to talk about herself more than the person she's interviewing. Now, you could say that is Sun in Leo, but what this article was suggesting was that she was very focused on maintaining an image, Moon conjunct Saturn, and that maintaining an image and being very careful what she reveals, what she doesn't reveal. And I suppose on social media, it's considered to be, you've got to reveal something. You've got to show, you've got to perhaps reveal your own vulnerabilities. You've got to be able to, I suppose, take risks and be self-deprecating, perhaps. And that Moon conjunct Saturn may just have been maybe so obsessed with control and image that it just brings her to a standstill. And maybe it didn't actually help in terms of her acting career. I mean, she didn't get to the heights, did she? I mean, I suppose she had some success as an actor, but there were complete limits to that success. So maybe that Moon-Saturn conjunction, she really would need that does need to be negotiated. And then her Venus, I was thinking about her Venus. Her Venus seems a very prominent Venus in terms of the way she clearly seems to use people. I mean, I was talking about her, I think yesterday I was talking about her, the fact, that's why Piers Morgan got so upset with her, because he felt that he kind of used by her. He was useful up to a point, but as soon as she met Harry, he got ghosted. And people through her life, including her family, have been used. Venus and Virgo, looking at the purpose of someone, and once someone fulfills their useful purpose, and that's it. She's done with them. And I even had that she actually did that with her animals. She coming up with as a very compassionate person. But someone said that there was she had sort of rescue animals, but at a certain point they weren't really useful anymore. I don't know. And so she sort of moved on. She didn't need these animals anymore, or they weren't convenient. I heard that. So that could be how this Venus Virgo is working. And Venus is sextile to Mars, it's true, but that Venus and Virgo is it's not particularly well integrated in the rest of the chart. I mean, you look at that chart and you just see that little green Venus. It's not quite there. It's her only planet in an Earth sign, and it just doesn't seem too connected. Venus does not make any close major aspects to any other planet in the chart except for Mars. And Mars itself, is square Saturn as Jupiter, but even Mars is quite widely square to Mars and to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So that Venus and Mars sextile, Mars is the only planet in water. Venus is her only planet in Virgo, in Earth, and they seem to be a complex, but sort of working in their own way. And so that Venus in Virgo might be somewhat out of control. And So perhaps we need to consider that. And Venus is her. Venus is not going to be projected. It's an aspect of who she is. And so I suppose if I was advising her, I would say that Venus in Virgo somehow needs to be brought into line, because it's causing her a lot of damage, I would have thought. And then that Mars. No, I believe that Mars to an extent represents Harry. And because Harry is a male planet, it's projectable, and Harry is he's a soldier, or was a soldier, or a military man. Mars, traditional astrology, Mars is a military man. Mars is in Cancer. It's fallen in Cancer. Harry is a man who wears his heart on his sleeve. He's quite brooding. He has grudges. That's the way he is. His obsession with the press and going on and on about them. I think that fits Mars in Cancer, and I suppose from her perspective, he seems to be quite a weak man, at least compared to her. And particularly now he's in America, or he's not particularly strong, but he's quite angry. So that's Mars in Cancer. Now, what's interesting about that Mars in Cancer is that it is square her midheaven, and maybe this is part of a problem that Meghan has. That in fact, it's like for some reason Meghan got it into her head that she had to focus on relationships. Maybe she was just getting into her south node here. I don't know, but relationships were important. Maybe it was connected with her biological clock, but also for a number of reasons. But she felt it was important. But she also, in terms of wanting security and money and success and everything else and recognition, and so she put her energy into finding the right relationship, and in a very determined kind of way, in a determined, systematic kind of way. Moon conjunct Saturn, Sun Leo, doing it. Yeah, she got her man. But that Mars square midheaven, it seems to mess her career up. And Mars square the midheaven, and of course the midheaven is also how we are perceived in public. And because of that Mars, she's now perceived by a great chunk of the population in the United States and in the UK and other places. In particular, it's interesting. You look at some of the people who are most hostile to Meghan are some of the Australian channels. It seems there are a lot of people in Australia that really can't stand it. It's not just the Americans and the US. There's this group of people that really, really want to tear her down. And so maybe that's that Mars square the midheaven. And Mars isn't just about Harry. It's just about all her enemies. And she just attracts negative publicity. And that may be Mars square midheaven. And maybe Harry certainly hasn't helped. And it just may be that if she had just carried on with her social media stuff and not wanted to marry Harry or someone else, has married someone in America, anyone in America, whatever. I mean, I know she'd already had one marriage. Maybe she would have been able to tune into her own originality and her drive, and maybe she would have been quietly successful and would have ended up being actually more happy. And so perhaps this Mars square midheaven is just really messed things up for her. Now, in terms of what's happening to Meghan at the moment, I'm going to perhaps start with her solar return, because she has a solar return. Her solar return is 2024. This is her solar return set for August the 3rd, 2024. So she had her solar return on August the 3rd, which would have been a Saturday. And so Meghan's solar return coincides with a new moon. And Venus is on the midheaven. So if I was talking to Meghan about this, I would have said that this solar return, there are certainly grounds for being quite positive about this. You would advise with a new moon on your birthday or very close to your birthday. In fact, she has got a new moon on her birthday. This really could be a new beginning for her. I mean, I know that's a sort of a cliche, new moon, new beginning, but it's time to sort of say goodbye to the past, all the stuff in the past that she's been caught up with, and she's probably trying to break away from it, but it's hard work. It's a new beginning. Notice that she's got Venus on Regulus, conjunct the midheaven, and that's got to be quite good. So there seems to be opportunities here to really restart herself. New moon is in the ninth house, so the ninth house, maybe she needs to consider perhaps a different country. Does she? Well, okay, she's not going to move from California, is she? California is where it's all at, as far as she's concerned, and so that's that new moon may be indicating that, maybe with that, maybe what she needs to do with a new moon, if I was advising her, is rather than think, I read somewhere that she was about to endorse Kamala Harris and get involved in that kind of thing. I don't think so. Not with that. If that's not a good idea, she'll probably do it anyway. But she needs to. This is a time to publicly reinvent herself. That's what she should do. Almost sort of make a statement that she's changed. That she needs to focus on a ninth house. Ninth house can be could be something about her spirituality and some new awareness, and perhaps even a sort of a confession, sort of admitting the errors of her ways. That might actually work quite well. Of course, she wouldn't do that, would she? But just to be able to turn over a completely new leaf. And there's that Uranus. Now that Uranus is square her Venus. So Uranus is the great disruptor, isn't it? It's like you've got Venus in Leo on the 10th house cusp. Is maybe a year when things are perhaps going her way, when things could go her way, with Venus conjunct Regulus conjunct the midheaven. But then it's square Uranus. And Uranus is actually square the midheaven. So Uranus is the disruptor. Something happens which just disrupts the whole thing. I mean, it could have worked so well, but that Uranus needs to be understood. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's inevitable, but again, she needs to. So probably what she needs to do is she needs to just relaunch her career. She's always relaunching her career, so that's not a problem for her. But to do it in a more substantive kind of way, and not to get trapped by that Uranus. That Uranus, I think, is a real problem. The fact that it is square her midheaven. A reminder also with that Uranus is that Uranus is not just square Uranus. It's not just square Venus, not just square the midheaven. It's square her natal Uranus, because her natal Uranus is at, I think, around 26 Taurus. So I think that's right. So yeah, she's got. Sorry, let me get that right. Sorry, her natal. Let me get this straight. Her natal Uranus is 26 Scorpio. So her natal Uranus is at 26 Scorpio, and so in the solar return, her Uranus is at 26 Taurus. So in other words, she's got Uranus opposition Uranus, and Uranus opposition Uranus can very much be a midlife crisis thing. I don't think Meghan would want to hear that, but when you're in your early 40s, she's just turned 43, this is the sort of midlife crisis in a way. Although, of course, now with all its medical advantages or whatever, she's likely to live longer than 86, isn't she? I mean, so it's not. I'm sure chances are it's not the halfway stage in her life. It's before the halfway stage, but still there is a certain midlife crisis sense for her with Uranus opposition Uranus. So that's one solar return. Then there is the converse solar return. So Meghan has just had her 43rd birthday. So for the regular direct solar return, it's obviously 43 years after she was born. The converse solar return is 43 years before she was born. So we set up a chart for early August 1938, sort of exactly 43 years before she was born. Yeah, so there is Meghan's solar return for August the 4th, 1938. And you can see that Pluto is quite close to the descendant. And we also have Uranus on the IC. So in her direct solar return, she had Uranus in the 7th house, quite close to the descendant. In her converse solar return, she's got Uranus on the IC, and she's got Pluto pretty close to the descendant. And so looking at those solar returns together, there is going to be some kind of turmoil going on. Something is going to happen that she wasn't expecting to happen. I mean, I know that turmoil is always happening in Meghan's life, but something's going to happen that she hadn't entirely planned for. And I think that so she probably really needs to think about that and think about how is she going to plan for that. I do think that that's going to be very important. And I suppose you can think about Harry and her relationship with Harry, Pluto in the 7th. So she has to be a little bit careful about that. I think it's not really appropriate at this stage to sort of question about how the marriage is doing. I mean, I think that both Harry and Meghan probably have a considerable stake in maintaining that marriage. Although we have to remember, in terms of her marriage and looking at just from her perspective, this is looking at her direct solar return. It is about a new moon, a new beginning. And I suppose it may be best with that new moon and Uranus in the 7th house in that direct solar return. One has to ask, is her marriage with Harry, it may actually be holding her back. I mean, maybe she's just been tied to the sort of career supposed advantages of financial and status advantages of being married to Harry. But, maybe with her chart and that south node in the 7th, I think there is a possibility that you could say that it's not useful, her relationship with Harry, and it's not helping him either. So I'm certainly not saying they're going to break up. I think it might actually be in both of their interests for them to break up. So that I think is a possibility, because if she were to break up with Harry, it would be a sort of a new stage in her life. And then she could perhaps start to move on and rediscover her creativity and her independence, and perhaps wouldn't be so concerned with trying to mimic something else. And finally, I just wanted to have another quick look at her Vedic chart. I have looked at her Vedic chart in the past, and so her Vedic chart is here. So turning to Meghan's Vedic chart, so Meghan is in her Jupiter Dasha, and her Jupiter, remember in Indian astrology, they divide life up into 9 discrete periods, which all add up to 120 years. And her Jupiter is the weakest planet according to the Shadbala system. Jupiter is the weakest planet in her chart. Yet, you could say, her Jupiter Dasha started in 2015, and you could say, well, this is the time that she reached the heights becoming a Class A celebrity or whatever, an A-list, sorry, what do they call them? You have Class A drugs, at least in the UK you have Class A drugs, and then you have A-list celebrities. I need to get I don't want to mix the two up. Yeah, it's not a Class A celebrity, it's an A-list celebrity, isn't it? You have a Jupiter which is potentially quite weak, and that Jupiter is conjunct Saturn. Maybe at some level that Saturn is somehow managing to strengthen Jupiter. Saturn is Saturn's ruler of the 10th, isn't it, in her chart? So I suppose you could say that with her Saturn in the 10th, that perhaps is Harry, and so it could be a situation where in the end, when she meets Harry, she met Harry and she started getting involved. I mean, she married Harry in around 2017, didn't he? 2018, around there. That's when she was in her Jupiter major dasha and Saturn minor dasha, and so I think that fits, that she's got this Jupiter Saturn conjunction. That's when it really all happened. And then she moved, and right now she's in her Jupiter major dasha and Venus minor dasha. So there is this question about what is the condition of her Venus. Her Venus in itself is perhaps not too bad. It's not in a great position, but in Indian astrology, Saturn is currently in Aquarius. So I know that in Western astrology it's in Pisces, but in Vedic astrology it's in Aquarius. So it's in the 11th house. It's in the 8th house. It's in Aquarius in the 8th house. So she's got Saturn in her, moving through her 8th house. And so with Saturn in her 8th house, opposition Venus, that's difficult. That Venus is being undermined. So as soon as her Venus period started, which was last June, she's constantly got these difficulties with Saturn transiting her Venus, transiting her 8th house and making an opposition aspect to her Venus. So that is a constant problem. And then we've got next year, Saturn moves into sidereal Pisces, and that movement into sidereal Pisces, which I think sort of happens early 2025, is Saturn is going to be opposition her Moon, her Saturn, her Jupiter. So that could represent further problems for her. And maybe Pisces is the 12th house from the Moon, and so that might further undermine her relationship with Harry. I think there are issues with Harry, and again, I'm not going to say that she and Harry are going to split up, but I think that there is evidence from her chart that it might be in both of their interests for them to split up. Certainly, I think in her interest at certain points. Certainly from her, in her sort of developmental interests, in terms of where she's going in her life, and being able to tune into herself rather than be focusing on other things, other people. And I don't think she's fully living out her chart. But I do think with the solar return, particularly the direct solar return for 2024 solar return, I think it can be a good year with that new moon on her birthday, and also with Venus on Regulus on her midheaven. It is possibly a time for her to recreate herself. But the question is, can she fully recreate herself when Harry is around? Okay, those are some thoughts on Meghan. I hope you found that of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, of course, super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.